Thank you, Michael. So this talk is entitled "Who Tweets and Where: Social, Political, and Environmental Determinants of Twitter Use in France." The talk obviously will be about trying to explain tweeting behavior in France using localized census data. And please note that it's really a new beginning research that is aimed at being a sort of experience between people in the Data Institute. So that means me, I'm a social scientist, sociologist at Sciences Po and PACT Research Lab. Etienne Dublé from League, who gathered all the data I'm going to present today, and Sophie Kugler, who is working at PACT on data science methods, and who is starting to implement machine learning algorithms on those data, but I'm not going to show you any machine learning algorithms today, so I hope it's not going to be too disappointing. So the issue, so that's the outline of the talk, but it's not that important. I wanted to start with the problem that we have with Twitter and a lot of social networks data in social sciences. And I sort of framed it as, on one side, the promised land, and on the other one, the sociologist's nightmare. So the idea of the promised land is that if you look at the data that Twitter provides about its users, you can see that in January we had 330 million users, monthly active users in the world. The number of tweets sent per day is around 500 million, and most of the users use Twitter on a mobile device. The number of monthly active users in France is 21.8 million. So that means a lot of people share things on Twitter, a lot of people are on Twitter. So for sociologists, for sort of gold mine to understand many things like opinions and behaviors, and that's the promised land. You can also look at the unique visitors on the websites and notice that Twitter just there is the fourth website visited in France with more than 12 million unique visitors every month. So that makes Twitter one of the big platforms for this kind of virtual public sphere that we have now. And of course, they have much more unique visitors than the mass media, the legacy media. Amazing, the first media is just Télé Loisirs, and it's just above Le Monde, which is the biggest news website in France. And then the nightmare. The nightmare is mostly about the fact that we don't know anything about the users on Twitter. That was the purpose of my first picture with those guys tweeting. We know what they tweet. It's quite easy to get the tweets and the contents of the tweets, but who they are, it's really a big problem. We know a few things. That's what Twitter says. And one of the most amazing things, and that of course should be a sort of red light whenever you see a study based on Twitter data and that extrapolates some global behaviors from Twitter data. One of the first things to know is that about half Twitter users never sent a tweet. So a lot of people have a Twitter account but never tweet. And if you have a limit at 50 tweets, then you get only 8% of the Twitter account that can qualify. And of course, we have some biases that are quite well known. There is the official Twitter data, and that gathered by Médiamétrie in France. There is a gender bias on Twitter. There is an age bias, and of course also social class bias. So you can see this on this summary that comes from Médiamétrie. So a little bit more men than women on Twitter, a lot more younger people on Twitter than the average web users and the average structure of the population, and more. So it's kind of tricky for me because in marketing they use this CSP plus definition. That's a little bit strange, but let's say white collars are overrepresented on Twitter. So we know there are biases. There has been a whole bunch of research done to try to infer the attributes of Twitter users based on mostly the profile information, so what you put on your Twitter profile, the tweeting behavior, when, where you tweet, the linguistic content of tweets, and social network information, so who you retweet, for instance. So if you are interested, some colleagues inferred gender, for instance, age, occupation and social class, location, political orientations, ethnicity from all these variables. So that are really things you can find on Twitter and you get when you connect to the API. And of course, the methods here are mostly supervised machine learning. So that means you need a training set. And of course, then there is a selection bias because if you look at, for instance, I don't know, gender, you will look for tweets mentioning the gender of the person, and then you probably get selection bias. Some other research has been conducted to try to infer the user's attributes from something that's outside Twitter. One of the ideas was to look at account lists to infer the profession, like scholars. If you have a Twitter account, you probably are somewhere on the web listed as a scholar, so you can look for this kind of data. Websites visitor demographics, so if you retweet papers from Le Monde, that means you are a Le Monde visitor, so we know some things about you. And then there is this idea of using geotagged tweets to retrieve the socio-demographics attributes from census data. So there has been one attempt in the US in 2011, and what we are doing is a sort of new attempt to do this. Why doing this matters? Because of course, Twitter-based research has to be aware of the biases at the user level. Tweets are sent by a biased part of the overall population, but also because we need to know more about tweeting behaviors. When do people tweet and in what circumstances? People do not tweet randomly during the day or wherever they are. And then because mapping tweets geographically is quite interesting to look for social phenomena like urban segregation, political participation that really are linked to the geographical structures. So I just come to some modeling and results now. The data we are using has been collected by Etienne Dublé from 2014 and 2017, and it's only tweets that have a geolocalization in them. So that's 32.8 million tweets. And what we did basically is that I collected a lot of information on the IRIS basis. So IRIS is the smallest geographical zone in France for which we have the census information, like the population, the share of young people, the share of white collars, etc., etc. It's about 2,500 inhabitants. And so we described every iris that way, and then we constituted a dataset of about 50,000 iris, counting at least one tweet in that period, and with all the information I just mentioned. some information was only available at the city or the town level. So we also have data sets at the town levels. It's as only 33,000 towns, and this is the one I'm going to show you today. Of course, one of the key questions that we had to face and to address was: are we biasing the Twitter stream by just selecting the tweets with geotagging? Well, you've got all the information there. The ID, the basic ID, is that it's only a very small share of the tweets that are geotagged. So you of course, geotagging means latitude and longitude are mentioned in the tweets, just not the city. And so that means a lot of people do not want the tweets to be geotagged. And there are some estimates around less than 1% of the tweets are geotagged, and around 3% of the users have once sent a tweet that has geo-localized information. But all the research that has been conducted on this question shows that there is no bias among users considering gender, age, or social class, whether or not you decide to geotag your tweets. There is a bias that is linked to the language and the country where you come from. And so I gave you some insight on this there. I don't know really how to interpret this, but 2.6% of the French people once geotagged a tweet. Okay. So let us look at some results. The first thing we did was trying to map the structure of tweeting in France. Of course, a map of France would be completely impossible to show on a slideshow. So this is the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region. And what you can see is that if you consider just the number of tweets in every town, then you have a very strong, urban structure effect. So here you've got Lyon, Grenoble is here, and then you've got Saint-Étienne and Clermont-Ferrand. So the big cities produce a lot of tweets. No a big deal there. Now, if you just control the number of people living somewhere in a town, then you have something very interesting that arises. You've got small zone like this one where you have a lot of tweets, and this is just the airport. So people tend to tweet where where they travel, where they commute. And then you've got all these, ski resorts where there are a lot of tweets too. So it's kind of tricky, but people do not tweet so much at work, or that there is a sort of over-representation of tweeting when you are going to take a plane or doing ski. If you take now the iris level, so the small, unit, the three areas with the most important number of tweet rates in France are the Louvre Museum, then the small portion of the Quai de la Seine, so where people wander or where they just drive. I don't know if they tweet when they drive, and then the Orly Airport. Okay, so first thing that was really interesting was to kind of map this structure. Which one? There? I don't know. It's. I looked at on the map, and it's a place with nothing very significant, but I think it's very small, towns there. So perhaps there is, you just need one guy tweeting a lot in a very small town, and then you've got this kind of thing. Because there it's the whole population, okay? And then I'm going to show you results where we just limit it to the towns with more than 1,000 inhabitants, because otherwise, really, you clearly are dependent on hazards like finding the Twitter guy in the village. Okay, so if you look at the distribution of that tweet num, so variable, so that's the number of tweets in a town, and you clearly see that it's a distribution with a lot of towns with a very small number of tweets. Okay, this is just one tweet. So we had to do something about that, and that's why we changed. We decided to just study towns with more than 1,000 inhabitants, and then the other thing was to kind of think that the cleverest idea I could find, but I'm not a specialist in machine learning and data science, was to model the log of the number of tweets and not the number of tweets. So the idea was to try to create a model and try to see what could explain the number of tweets. So first idea was the urban environment, and the idea that the number of inhabitants and the density of the population would have a positive relation to the number of tweets. So that the map was kind of about that. Then there was tourism. I tried to find data that could be some proxy of the number of tourists, the number of hotels by inhabitants, the number of tourist information points, the number of airports, and the number of museums by inhabitants. Then, of course, there are the demographics, the share of men, young people, and foreigners, social classes, white collars, highly educated people. And we were hypothesizing a positive relation to wealth, the income that would have a positive effect in our hypothesis, and unemployment a negative effect, and then the activity. We put the high school rate in town and the shops and the businesses rates, so big businesses like more than 50 employees, that would also have a positive effect. And then we put some information about the political participation. So the idea was to have the participation rate at the 2014 local elections, and the hypothesis was, again, that would have a positive effect on the number of tweets. I'm not so much going to comment on this very trivial method that I used, but a simple, linear model on the log of. Oh no, sorry, that's the square root. So we tried both the square root of the tweet num and the log. Just can see that we have kind of a good prediction of the variance of the number of tweets. And if you look at what's is working and what's not working, actually my comments were intended to be on the log, but I don't see it, so I just made a mistake, and you just have the square root. We have a positive effect of the population, so 1,000 inhabitants more. If you add 1,000 inhabitants in a city, then you increase the tweet num by 0.2%. The density has also a positive impact on the number of tweets. And then we have all these tourism proxies that are less, that have less explaining capacity, but airports, for instance, have clearly positive impact on the number of tweets as well as the number of hotels. Two interesting things, perhaps, because we kind of validated our hypothesis regarding, for instance, the social classes. So PCS3 means white collars, cadre supérieur. And so that's interesting because there is a negative effect on the square root, but it's positive for the log. And the level of education. So if you have a university degree, then it's going to be also a positive impact. But two things are quite counterintuitive. The first one is that the share of male population has a negative impact on the number of tweets, and then the political participation has also a negative impact. So that's kind of something interesting. We don't really know right now how to interpret this, but it's very easy to observe if you just do if you just plot the two variables. For instance, here you've got the participation, so it's just the share of people who participated to the first round of the election, and then you've got the log of the tweet name. There is a big, of course, it's very scattered clouds, but there is clearly a connection. Every point is a town. Okay, so for every town, I have the participation rate, and then I have the number of tweets. And it's only the towns with more than 1,000 inhabitants. Yeah, could be. It could be, of course. Then we also have the to complete this hypothesis, we have the share of the younger part of the population, and well, it's kind of obvious that there is a positive relation, and this is the share of the cadre supérieur, white collars, and this is the very interesting and kind of deceiving result for sociologists that the more people use public transport in a town, and the more they tweet. So that's kind of interesting, but you cannot say a lot of things about that. Okay. So what's next? This is really the start of our study. I would be very glad to have your reaction or ideas to kind of find new methods to address this to analyze this data. We need to put some energy into addressing the ecological fallacy risk, and notably the fact that actually right now the dataset I just showed you gives us information about the tweets in a specific location, but we don't know if those tweets are sent by people living there. So we have the problem of the Japanese tourist who is there just for the Louvre Museum, and we have the problem of the commuting person, the person who is living in a town next to the one where they work, and that could be tweeting at work. There are some methods. So right now we are working on a new data set that was built with only the people tweeting in at least 2 different months in the period, the 3 years period. So that's about excluding the most of the tourists in our data set. And of course we need to look at the content of the tweets. Right now we just consider the amount of tweets, and the next step would be to look at the content of the tweets to answer such questions as, is there a relation between the content and, for instance, participation levels, these kind of things. Thank you very much for your attention.